Can we share your fries, sir? The single mom asked, unaware she was speaking to a billionaire. The rain had just stopped, leaving the sidewalk slick and shining beneath the soft glow of late afternoon. Marin stepped into the small lakeside café, one hand holding her son's and the other clutching a damp, folded umbrella. The autumn breeze had tangled her blonde hair, and a lingering chill clung to her clothes. "Come on, sweetie," she whispered. 5-year-old Theo looked up at her with sleepy eyes and a tired smile. His tiny boots squeaked softly against the floor as they stepped inside. Warm air wrapped around them, carrying the comforting scent of roasted coffee beans and crisp French fries. With the outdoor seating soaked from the rain, everyone had crowded indoors. Marin scanned the room, hopeful. Her heart sank. The only available spot was half of a small 2-person table in the back, already occupied by a man in a charcoal coat. He sat alone, flipping through a folder, a plate of golden fries barely touched in front of him. She hesitated, then approached the counter. She ordered a small latte and a warm milk. Opening her worn leather wallet, she counted the few coins left inside. A grocery discount card and a faded baby photo of Theo rested there. She smiled politely at the cashier, then glanced around the cafe again. The young barista leaned over and spoke gently. "You can ask the gentleman over there. He seems fine. Polite. Quiet." Marin took a breath and walked over. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Would you mind if we sat here for just a few minutes?" The man looked up. His eyes were sharp, unreadable. He studied her for a moment, then glanced at Theo. Without a word, he nodded and gestured toward the empty seat. "Thank you," Marin said, helping Theo into the chair. She handed him his milk, sat down and sipped her coffee, trying not to show how exhausted she felt. They sat quietly. The man returned to his reading. Marin removed Theo's raincoat and brushed the damp hair from his forehead. The boy's eyes drifted toward the plate of fries. He didn't say a word, but the longing was obvious. Marin noticed. She leaned down and whispered something to him. Theo shook his head, embarrassed. Marin straightened, took a breath and looked at the man. "Can we share your fries, sir?" she asked, her cheeks flushing. "I'll pay for them. I just didn't have enough for food today." The man paused mid-page and looked up at her. For a moment he said nothing. Then he smiled, just slightly, and slid the plate toward the center of the table. "They're better when shared anyway," he said. "Thank you," Marin replied softly. Theo's face lit up as he carefully picked up a fry, holding it as if it were something precious. The man's smile deepened. Marin stood to grab napkins. Behind the counter, 2 baristas leaned toward each other. "Do you know who that is?" one whispered. "That's Elian Drake, the billionaire tech guy." "That's him." Elian heard them but showed no reaction. He exhaled slowly, his faint smile unchanged. When Marin returned, unaware of the whispers, she said to Theo, "Say thank you properly, sweetheart." Theo straightened. "Thank you, sir. You're really kind." Elian looked at the boy, then at Marin. He studied them for a long moment before closing his folder and setting it aside for the first time that day. They ate together, at first in silence. Then Theo began talking about dinosaurs, puddles, and his favorite bedtime story. Marin let him chatter freely, sipping her coffee. Elian listened, content, laughing more than once at stories he never knew he needed to hear. When they finished, Marin reached into her bag. "I'll pay for our drinks and the fries." The server smiled. "It's already taken care of." Marin turned to Elian. She didn't gush or fumble. She simply nodded. "I'll pay it forward. That's how I balance kindness." He didn't reply, but the way she said it, grateful not dependent, stayed with him. They parted without names, without promises. Just a shared plate of fries and laughter that lingered longer than the rain. Later, the October sky hung dull and gray as rain fell in thin, steady lines against the windshield of Elian's parked car near a quiet bus stop. He leaned back in the driver's seat, phone pressed between his shoulder and ear, listening to his assistant list meetings and contracts. His gaze drifted to the sidewalk. Across the street, Marin stood beneath the narrow overhang of a bus shelter, arms wrapped tightly around Theo. The boy's cheeks were flushed from the cold, his coat too thin for the wind. Marin's jeans were dark with rain, her hair plastered to her face, but all her attention was on her son. Elian watched as she crouched, opened a worn backpack and pulled out a folded plastic grocery bag. She gently draped it over Theo's head and shoulders, tucking it under his chin. It looked silly like a makeshift poncho, but Theo beamed. Then Maren removed her own scarf and wrapped it around Theo's neck, pulling him close. She stood there exposed to the rain, shivering as water ran down her back. Elion's hand moved toward the door handle. Instinct urged him to help, but he froze. If I go now, he thought, she'll think it's pity. He let go. Minutes later, the bus arrived. Maren guided Theo aboard. Elion turned off his engine, crossed the street, and quietly boarded the same bus, sitting near the back. Maren didn't notice him. The bus was damp and hushed, filled with foggy windows and the hiss of brakes. Theo leaned into Maren, eyelids heavy. She cradled him, rubbing slow circles on his back. Her fingers trembled with cold, but her voice stayed warm. She lifted her hand and formed a small rabbit with her fingers, casting shadows on the ceiling beneath the dim lights. Look, she whispered. Mr. Rabbit's hopping to the moon. Theo giggled softly, reaching up to try. Maren laughed, too thin from the cold but full of life. Her lips were faintly blue, yet her eyes shone. Elion felt something crack open inside him. At the next stop, Maren lifted Theo, now asleep, adjusted the plastic bag, and carried him out into the drizzle. Elion stayed seated, watching as they disappeared down the street under a flickering street lamp. One small shadow, one larger, and a plastic bag glowing briefly like a halo. He didn't call out. He didn't follow. But he knew he would never forget the woman who used a plastic bag, bare hands, and quiet magic to keep the only light in her world from going out. Days later, Elion stood across from a small underfunded community library on the edge of town. Faded bricks, cracked windows, and a hand-painted sign gave it the charm of something forgotten but alive. He hadn't asked for her address, only where she worked. He crossed the street and stepped inside, greeted by the soft rustle of pages and the comforting scent of crayons and old paper. It was warm in a worn-out way, like a childhood blanket that had seen better days, yet still knew how to comfort. And for the first time in a long while, Elion felt like he had finally stepped into the right place. Leaning shelves surrounded the small children's corner of the library. Maren sat at a child-sized table with a group of kids gathered close, her body slightly hunched over a sketchpad. Her blonde hair was loosely tied back, sleeves rolled to her elbows, a red-colored pencil moving confidently across the page. Smudges of color marked the back of her wrist like quiet evidence of hours spent creating. Elion did not move. He stood behind a shelf just out of sight, watching her without fully understanding why he felt rooted there. She was drawing. On the table lay pages filled with soft, whimsical sketches, donated books pushed aside to make room. A woman walking through rain with a little boy beneath an umbrella made of stars. A child laughing at shadow puppets dancing across a ceiling. A small crooked house glowing warmly against a night full of wonder. They were simple. They were beautiful. They were her life and somehow more than that. When Maren leaned back to stretch, she finally noticed him. Surprise flickered briefly across her face, but there was no discomfort. Elion, she said, setting the pencil down. I hope this isn't inappropriate, he replied as he stepped closer. I was curious. He gestured toward the drawings. Do you always draw your own life? She glanced at the pages, then back at him, a soft, tired smile touching her lips. Some of it, she said. And some of it is what I wish my life had looked like. I draw the moments I never had time to make happen. There was no bitterness in her voice. No self-pity. Just honesty. Elion stepped closer and picked up a sketch of the boy laughing at shadow puppets. You could publish these, he said quietly. They're good. More than good. Maren chuckled and shrugged. I tried once. Years ago. Back when I still thought dreams were something you grow into, not grow out of. The words landed heavily in his chest. He had once believed in dreams too. Built companies from ideas scribbled in notebooks, stayed up all night chasing possibilities. Somewhere along the way, ambition had swallowed wonder, and schedules had replaced stories. She noticed his silence and smiled gently. It's okay, she said. Life moves. You adjust. A small girl with tangled braids ran across the room and wrapped her arms around Maren's leg. Miss Maren, I finished my book. I read all the pages. That's amazing, Maren said, crouching down. You're becoming a real bookworm. The girl beamed. Your drawings make my bad days better. Maren brushed a curl from the child's face, her expression softening. Elyon watched quietly, the sketch still in his hand. He didn't say that in 5 minutes here, he'd felt more meaning than in 100 shareholder meetings. He didn't say he had forgotten how powerful quiet joy could be. He simply set the sketch down, met Maren's eyes, and nodded once. For the first time in a very long while, he wanted to know what came next. The sky above the city grew heavy, the kind of stillness that came before rain. Golden light stretched across the park near Elyon's headquarters as the sun dipped behind glass towers. He sat slumped on a weathered bench beneath an oak tree, coat unbuttoned, tie loosened, hands clasped between his knees. A 5-hour meeting had collapsed into nothing. Months of work gone in a sentence. Worse than the loss was the emptiness that followed. Not anger, not frustration, just silence. Gravel crunched nearby. You look like someone who skipped lunch. He opened his eyes. Maren stood a few feet away, grocery tote in hand, coat buttoned to her chin, wisps of hair brushing her cheeks. She wasn't smiling exactly, but there was warmth in her gaze. Recognition not of a billionaire but of a tired human being. I'm a mom, she added, sitting beside him. We sense that kind of thing. To his own surprise he laughed, quiet, brief, real. She pulled a cracked granola bar from her bag and offered it without ceremony. Emergency snack. Best I've got. Their fingers brushed as he took it. They ate in silence, the bench creaking softly beneath them. Birds passed low overhead. The city darkened around them. Her presence was grounding, like stepping into warmth after cold. She stood at last, brushing crumbs from her coat. You're allowed to fall apart, she said gently. Even machines need maintenance. She walked away, leaving him lighter somehow, seen without being examined. He stared at the empty wrapper in his hand and smiled. Sometimes the smallest kindness stayed the longest. The bakery smelled of cinnamon and sugar. Nearing closing time. Maren moved behind the counter, exhausted but precise, boxing pastries with trembling hands. She'd come straight from the library, no dinner, no break. Elyon saw her before she saw him. Her knees buckled without warning. He was already moving. Don't call an ambulance, he said calmly as he lifted her. I'm taking her to my building. There's medical staff there. In the wellness suite, a nurse sat in 4 and checked her vitals. Dehydrated, overheated, worn past her limit. Elyon sat nearby, guilt heavy in his chest. Then the door opened. Theo rushed in, clutching his mother's bag. He climbed onto the sofa beside her, focused and calm. From the bag he pulled a thermos, poured honey water into a cup, dampened a towel and laid it gently across her forehead. He tucked the blanket around her shoulders. When Mom sleeps, I protect her, he whispered. 'Cause she always protects me. Elyon turned away. They didn't need saving, he realized. They just needed someone who wouldn't walk away. The offer came quietly. A folder on Maren's doorstep. A part-time creative consultant role on a children's storytelling app. Flexible hours. Real structure. No strings. Just an idea. You're already doing the work. She accepted. Her desk overlooked a courtyard. A sketchpad and pens waited neatly. The nameplate read, Maren Caldwell, Creative Development. Elyon became a quiet presence, never hovering, never demanding. Sometimes feedback. Sometimes ginger tea. Sometimes just a look that said you belong here. One afternoon she caught him watching her sketch. A forest glowing with fireflies, a mother owl tucking in her baby. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was named. But it was there. And for the first time both of them knew this wasn't rescue. It was recognition. Maren looked down at her folder of sketches, then at the nameplate on her desk. She had a place here. Not because someone pitied her, not because she had been rescued, but because someone believed she was good enough to belong. That realization changed everything. The new apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a creaky floorboard in the hallway that announced every step. But to Maren and Theo it felt like a dream. Sunlight poured through the windows, warming the worn hardwood floors and soft beige walls. The air carried the faint scent of lemon cleaner and fresh paint. On the tiny balcony sat a clearance sale plant, proud and green. The kitchen still smelled faintly of pancakes from that morning. Theo stood in his new room, eyes wide, staring at the desk where a green backpack rested, neatly zipped. "Is this mine?" he asked, barely above a whisper. "All yours," Marin said, kneeling beside him. "And it comes with matching shoes." He looked down at his sneakers, brand new white with blue lightning bolts, and wiggled his toes. "They feel like running fast." "You're going to need them," she smiled. "Kindergarten is serious business." Theo laughed and wrapped his arms around her. "I like our new home, Mommy. It smells like pancakes and your hugs." Later that week, Marin taped Theo's drawings to the wall. Stick figures under rainbow skies. A surprisingly impressive dinosaur wearing boots. She stepped back and admired them like priceless art. That afternoon, Elian stopped by. He had texted earlier, asking if she had a minute to review feedback on the children's app. When she said yes, he arrived with papers in one hand and a small bag in the other. "For Theo," he said as she opened the door. Inside were crayons, markers, and a stack of fresh drawing paper. Marin raised an eyebrow. "You know you're setting a dangerous precedent, right?" "He'll have to design our company logo for free someday," Elian replied with a small grin. Theo peeked out from his room, then ran forward. "What's that?" "Supplies," Elian said. "For our top artist." Theo took the bag carefully, but instead of opening it, he looked up at him. "Wait." He darted back into his room and returned with a folded drawing, creased and soft from being handled so often. He handed it to Elian gently. "It's us from when we met. When you shared your fries." Elian unfolded it. 3 stick figures sat at a round table beneath a glowing yellow light. One small figure smiled wide. One had long hair and a coffee cup. The third had a plate of fries so big it nearly filled the page. Above the man's head, a speech bubble read, "They're better when shared." Something tugged in Elian's chest. Before he could speak, Theo looked up at him and said, "Thank you for believing in my mom. I know she's a superhero, but sometimes superheroes need help too." The room fell silent. Marin, who had just walked in, stopped short. Her eyes shimmered. Elian knelt beside Theo and rested a hand on his shoulder. "You know," he said quietly, "I think she might be the strongest superhero I've ever met." Theo smiled proudly. Later, after Theo disappeared into his room with his new markers, Marin remained in the living room, thoughtful. Elian lingered near the door, still holding the drawing. It felt heavier than paper, like something sacred. "You didn't have to bring him anything," Marin said softly. "I wanted to," Elian replied. She nodded, her voice gentle. "He gets that heart from you." Their eyes met. No rush. No promises. Just something shared in the quiet. Outside, the sky shifted toward gold. Inside, between fading sunlight and scattered crayons, something unspoken settled. Kindness, connection, and the slow beginning of something more. Change no longer felt like a threat. Felt like a promise. The Children's Tech Expo buzzed with energy. Booths overflowed with color, laughter, and bright ideas. Near the main stage, a banner fluttered softly. "Little worlds, stories that grow with you." Marin stood just off stage, her heart pounding, as Theo climbed the steps in his blue sweater. His sneakers squeaked softly. Behind him, his drawing appeared on the giant screen. He picked up a marker and began. "I started with a house," he said into the microphone. "Simple and cozy. That's my mom's house. She makes stories and pancakes shaped like stars." The audience chuckled. Next, he drew a figure with wild yellow hair. "That's my mom too," he said proudly. Then he added a man in a long coat holding a plate. A speech bubble floated above him. "They're better when shared." "And that's Elian," Theo continued. "He shared his fries. Then he helped my mom make a story app. He's my friend who wears serious shoes." Even Elian, standing beside Marin, cracked a grin. Finally, Theo drew a giant plate of fries. "My favorite part," he announced. "Because that's where everything started." Marin felt her throat tighten as the room filled with applause. After the event, the three of them stepped back into the quieter rhythm of the city. The sun was lower now, the breeze sharper. Marin wrapped her scarf closer. Theo skipped between them, holding her hand. Elian walked on her other side, one hand in his coat pocket, the other carrying a bag of leftover treats from the expo. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. At the corner, Theo looked up. "Can we go back to the café?" Marin glanced at Elian. He lifted an eyebrow. Your call. She nodded. The cafe was quieter than she remembered. Same warm smells. Same tiny tables. Same creaky floorboard near the counter. Memory washed over her, the hesitation, the question that had changed everything. Elian ordered fries before anyone sat down. When the plate arrived, it was piled high. Ambitious, Marin said. I learned from the best, he replied. Theo reached out, then paused, suddenly serious. We have to share again. That's how everything started. Marin laughed softly. She slid the plate to the center of the table. They still taste better when shared, don't they? Elian looked at her. Not expectant, not careful, just present. He smiled and nodded. That was enough. No speeches. No labels. Just a quiet decision to stay in each other's lives. Outside the window, the sky glowed amber, the lake catching the fading light. From the street, someone might have seen them through the glass. A woman with gold-streaked hair, a boy with bright eyes, and a man finally at ease. They sat close. They laughed. They passed the fries. Still warm. Still shared. No longer his. No longer hers. Just theirs. And that was everything.